loneliness of middle age is not as loud or fierce as the heartache of youth. It's like a thick, cold fog, slowly enveloping every corner of my life. After my 10-year marriage dissolved, I drifted in my empty apartment in Sunbury, Pennsylvania. November 2013 brought with it the bone-chilling cold of the approaching winter, turning the long nights into torture. I wasn't looking for sex, nor was I seeking a committed relationship. I just needed a voice, a human presence to confirm that I still existed. That's why I turned to Craigslist. The companionship section was full of ambiguous invitations, but the ad from a girl named Miranda stopped me. She wrote very genuinely. She said she was new to town, felt lost, and wanted to find a mature, polite man to have dinner and talk with. There was no cheap, suggestive language. Her profile picture showed a young girl with long black hair, a round face, and large, round eyes. She looked completely harmless, even a bit innocent, like a struggling college student. I sent a message. She replied almost immediately. We exchanged a few pleasantries. Miranda said she was 19, married, but her husband was often away, and she was very bored. She wanted to meet tonight. Her eagerness made me hesitate slightly, but the loneliness won over my reason. We agreed to meet at 6 p.m. in the parking lot of the Susquehanna Valley Mall. I arrived 10 minutes early, sitting in my car watching the shoppers hurry by. Exactly at 6 p.m. my phone buzzed. Miranda texted that she had arrived, driving a red Honda CR-V parked in the west section. She suggested I get into her car because she knew a very good Italian restaurant in the next town and didn't want us to waste gas by driving 2 cars. A reason so logical that I didn't suspect anything. I found the red car prominent under the yellow streetlights. The window rolled down. Miranda sat in the driver's seat, smiling at me. In person, she looked even younger than in the photo, petite and gentle. I opened the passenger door and got in. The car smelled strongly of cheap air freshener, mixed with the cold scent of stale cigarettes. I fastened my seatbelt and turned to greet her. "Hello, David," Miranda said, her voice soft but slightly husky. "Thank you for coming." I smiled back, trying to appear at ease. When I glanced at the back seat, I saw a messy pile of blankets and several large black plastic bags piled up there. They took up almost all the back seat space. "Sorry about the mess," Miranda said quickly, her eyes still looking straight ahead. "I'm in the middle of moving and haven't had a chance to unload." "No problem," I replied. The car rolled out of the parking lot, merging into the sparse traffic on the highway. Miranda drove quite calmly. We started talking. Initially, it was polite small talk about work and the weather, but the further we drove from the central area, Miranda's questions became stranger. "Do you believe in God?" she asked abruptly, glancing at me in the rearview mirror. The question surprised me a little. I was a man who attended church every Sunday, but I didn't think this was a topic for a first date. "Yes, I do," I replied cautiously. "How about you?" Miranda chuckled softly, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I believe in something stronger. You know, sometimes people do terrible things, but if it's for a higher purpose, can it be forgiven?" I began to feel uneasy. The air in the car grew heavy. I looked out the window, realizing we had driven quite far from the crowded residential areas and were heading onto a narrow road, flanked by dark, dense woods. "Where are we going, Miranda? Is that restaurant far?" I asked, my hand instinctively placed on the door handle. "We're almost there," she replied, "just a little further." The car turned sharply onto a rough dirt road. The headlights swept across the gaunt tree trunks like dry skeletons. My gut told me something was terribly wrong. I was about to tell her to stop the car. Suddenly, Miranda spoke loudly, her voice sharp. "It's time." Before I could figure out who she was talking to, a sudden strong movement from behind startled me. The messy pile of blankets in the back seat abruptly rose up. A dark figure lunged forward. Before I could scream, a rough rope was thrown around my neck, tightening instantly. My breath was immediately cut off, my throat burned as if on fire. Someone was hiding in the back seat. He was very strong. His hands tightened the rope, pulling my head back, pressing it against the seat. I struggled in panic, clawing at the rope with my hands, but in vain. "Do it," the person behind me growled. It was a man's voice. At the same time, Miranda pulled a long hunting knife from under her seat, the blade glistening under the dashboard light. The innocent face from before vanished completely, replaced by a sick excitement. Her eyes were wide, rolling wildly like a mad animal. She swung the knife hard towards my chest. Survival instinct surged stronger than ever. Despite being choked, I managed to raise my left arm to block. The razor-sharp blade slashed into my forearm, hot blood gushing out. The pain, sharp to my core, brought me back to my senses. I knew if I didn't escape now, I would die. They wanted to kill me. This was a meticulously set trap. I mustered all the strength of a grown man, kicking both feet hard into the dashboard, simultaneously throwing my body weight back to heavily recline the seat and pin the guy behind me. The car swerved violently because Miranda lost control of the steering wheel. I lunged towards the driver's seat, grappling for the steering wheel. Miranda screamed, wildly slashing at me with the knife. One cut landed on my shoulder, another grazed my face. I no longer felt pain, only the adrenaline pumping through my chest. The car veered off the dirt road, slamming into a deep ditch by the roadside. A loud crash echoed. The front of the car plunged down, the airbags deploying and hitting Miranda's face, stunning her. The rope around my neck loosened a bit as the impact threw the person in the back forward. I seized that precious opportunity. I took a deep breath and shoved hard at my side door. The door was jammed from the collision. I had to shoulder charge it 3 times before it burst open. I tumbled out of the car, falling onto the cold, snow-covered ground. Blood from my arm and shoulder soaked my jacket. I scrambled to my feet, not daring to look back. "Stop!" Miranda's shriek rang out from inside the car. I ran headlong into the woods, heading towards the distant streetlights I had seen before turning in. Branches whipped my face, sharp thorns tore at my skin, but I kept running. I heard a car door slam and the sound of footsteps chasing me from behind, but the distance gradually widened. Perhaps the crash had injured them, or the car was stuck and couldn't follow. I ran until my lungs felt like they would burst, until I saw a large paved road. A truck was approaching. I ran into the middle of the road, waving my arms frantically. The truck driver slammed on the brakes. He saw my bloodied appearance and quickly opened the door to help. As soon as I sat in the warm cab, I collapsed, shaking uncontrollably. Police and an ambulance arrived at the scene shortly after. They found the red Honda CR-V still in the ditch, but Miranda and the man were gone. However, my blood and the evidence inside the car left too many clues. A few weeks later, the police captured them in another state, Miranda Barber and Elliot Barber, a young married couple, only 3 weeks wed. The most horrifying thing was not that they killed people for money. They killed for pleasure. They wanted to celebrate their wedding with the blood of a stranger. Watching the news on TV at the hospital, I felt a chill when I heard Miranda's testimony. She calmly confessed to the crime with a frightening indifference. She claimed I wasn't the only victim. She alleged she had killed at least 22 other people in various states over the past 6 years. She said she was part of a satanic cult, and the killings were ritual sacrifices. The police later said they hadn't found concrete evidence for the 22 people she claimed, suggesting it might just be the boast of a mentally unstable person seeking attention. But for me, whether the number was true or not didn't matter. What mattered was her gaze the moment she swung that knife. It wasn't the look of a human. It was the look of a true demon, empty and cruel. The man hiding in the back seat, Elliot, confessed that he just wanted to know what it felt like to choke someone to death. He said they chose me because I looked easily trusting. I touched the long scar on my neck where the rope had dug deep into my skin. The wound has healed, but the haunting has not. I no longer dare to date, no longer dare to trust invitations to connect online. Every time I see a red car or smell cheap perfume, I find myself sitting in that mobile metal box, trapped between 2 mad killers. I sought companionship to dispel the loneliness, but in the end, I realized that some things are far more terrifying than solitude. That's when you realize that, behind the innocent face of a young girl, there might be a knife waiting to take your life just for a sick amusement. I survived, but a part of my soul died in the Sunbury woods that night. The computer screen's fierce light was the only illumination in my miserable rental room at 2 a.m. My eyes were strained from hours of scrolling through job search websites, but my mind wouldn't let my body rest. 48 years old, my only remaining assets were mounting debts and a beat-up old car. I needed a miracle, or at least a lifeline, to keep from drowning in this stream of life. And then I saw it, a small ad on Craigslist. The title was short but promising: farm caretaker needed. Location, Noble County, Ohio. Salary, $300 a week plus room and board. The job description sounded like a dream for someone as exhausted as me. Just monitor the 688-acre property, deter poachers, and feed the livestock. A place to escape reality, a quiet place to restart my life in nature. I typed out an email reply immediately, my fingers trembling on the keyboard. The man who answered me called himself Jack. Through the emails and a few subsequent phone calls, Jack emerged as an older, kind, and devout man. He said he needed a trustworthy person, a capable man to help him manage the hunting retreat property. His voice on the phone was deep and warm, providing a strange sense of security. He asked about my circumstances, listening to my difficulties with deep sympathy. I thought God had finally smiled upon me. I didn't know I was talking to a devil in human disguise. On the day of departure, I packed all that was left of my life into the trunk of my car. Everything I owned fit into a few travel bags. I drove north from South Carolina, carrying the foolish hope of a brighter future. The highway stretched endlessly, the miles passing with a mix of excitement and anxiety. I reassured myself that this was a good opportunity, that Jack seemed like a nice person. I arrived at the meeting point on a dreary morning. It was the parking lot of a small roadside diner. Jack was already waiting there. He wasn't alone, but was accompanied by a teenager introduced as his nephew. My first impression of Jack perfectly matched what I had imagined. A white man in his 60s, slightly thin, with a weathered but kind face. He wore an old baseball cap and simple working man's clothes. He looked completely harmless, more like a neighborly uncle or a retired teacher than a wealthy farm owner. We shook hands. His hand was rough but warm. The teenager stood beside him, sullen and quiet, his eyes avoiding my direct gaze. Jack explained that the road to the farm was very bad, muddy and difficult, and my sedan wouldn't be able to handle the treacherous forest paths. He suggested I leave my car in the parking lot and transfer my belongings to his truck. A moment of hesitation flashed through my mind. Leaving my only means of transportation in a strange place made me uncomfortable. But then I looked at Jack's honest face, thinking of the promised salary and free accommodation awaiting me. Desperation had blurred my instincts for caution. I nodded in agreement. I moved my bags into the back of Jack's truck, locked my car, and climbed into the passenger seat of the pickup. The teenager sat in the back. The truck rolled out of town, heading towards the distant rolling hills. The deeper we went into rural Ohio, the more desolate the scenery became. Houses grew sparse, replaced by dense forests and rough, red dirt roads. Evening was starting to fall, the weak sunlight filtering through the trees, creating patchy streaks of light on the road. The atmosphere in the car was quiet. Jack occasionally made conversation, asking about my family. He asked if I had a wife and children or if anyone knew where I was going. I answered honestly that I was single, and I hadn't told anyone specifically about this trip because I wanted to surprise them once I was settled in the job. Jack nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. At the time, I just thought he was concerned about his employee, but thinking back now, that was when he was checking if his prey was tethered to anyone. The truck turned onto a narrow dirt track with weeds growing taller than a person on both sides. This area had once been a strip mine, the terrain bumpy and rugged. The desolation here didn't feel peaceful but rather deadly. There were no bird songs, no signs of human life, only the growling sound of the truck engine and the crunching of gravel under the tires. The vehicle stopped before a large slope blocked by a fallen tree. Jack turned off the engine, turned to me, and said we had to walk the rest of the way to see the log cabin intended for the employee. He said the road was impassable for the vehicle now. I stepped out of the truck, inhaling the cold air of the old forest. It was completely silent around us. The three of us began to walk. Jack led the way, I walked in the middle, and the teenager brought up the rear. The muddy trail led deep into the woods. The gaunt trees reached towards the gray sky like skeletal arms. A sense of unease began to creep into my gut. It started as vague discomfort and gradually turned into clear fear. Why was the farm located in such a remote and inaccessible place? Why wasn't there a decent road? Jack maintained a calm demeanor, occasionally pointing to areas around us and talking about his plans for raising livestock, but I sensed a change in the atmosphere. The teenager behind me kept his distance, his footsteps quiet but threatening. I tried to dismiss the negative thoughts, telling myself I was being overly suspicious. We walked for about 15 minutes until we reached a relatively flat area overgrown with tall grass. Ahead was a dry creek bed. Jack stopped, signaling for me to halt. He pointed toward a distant thicket, his voice lowered with a mysterious tone. "Look there," Jack said, still pointing forward. "I think something just ran past." I squinted in the direction he was pointing. I saw nothing but thorny bushes and patches of withered grass. My entire focus was directed forward, trying to find what Jack mentioned. Bang! A dry, sharp sound echoed next to my ear, tearing through the quiet space of the forest. Simultaneously, a powerful force struck my right elbow, pushing me staggering forward. The feeling of pain hadn't hit yet, only numbness and shock. I didn't understand what was happening. Was someone hunting nearby? I turned around. The sight before me froze the blood in my veins. Jack, the kind man from moments ago, was standing a few feet away from me, a handgun in his hand. His face held no trace of benevolence, replaced by the cold, ruthless look of a professional killer. His eyes stared at me without emotion, as if looking at an animal about to be butchered. He had shot me. He had aimed for my head from behind, but I had moved slightly, and the bullet had grazed past and lodged in my arm. The pain began to hit, throbbing to the bone marrow. Blood started soaking my sleeve, but the fear of death was greater than the physical pain. I saw Jack raising the gun again, his finger on the trigger. He intended to finish me off with another shot. Run! That was the only command my brain screamed at that moment. I didn't hesitate for a second. I turned and lunged straight into the thicket on the right, where the slope dropped down into a small valley. I heard the gun fire again behind me. The bullet whistled through the air, grazing my shoulder but missing its mark. I ran like a wounded wild animal. Branches whipped my face, sharp thorns tore at my clothes and skin, but I felt no pain. Adrenaline pumped through my veins, pushing my body past its limit of endurance. I slipped down the slope, tumbling over dry leaves and mud, then scrambled back up and kept running. Behind me, the voices of Jack and the teenager rang out. They were chasing me. I heard Jack swearing. He hadn't expected me to be alive and able to run so fast. I plunged deep into the dense woods, trying to find areas with the thickest vegetation to obstruct their view. My breath came in ragged gasps. My chest felt like it would explode. My right arm was numb, blood still pouring out, dripping onto the dry leaves beneath my feet, creating dark red streaks. I used my left hand to clutch the wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to stop. There was only the frantic pounding of my heart in my chest and the rustling of forest leaves under my feet. It was starting to get dark. The darkness was my only ally now. I found a small rock hollow hidden behind a large boulder and giant ferns. I squeezed into it, huddled up, trying to blend into the darkness. I held my breath, listening for movement around me. Footsteps. They were close. The sound of their boots crunching on gravel echoed clearly in the silent space. I heard Jack's voice, hoarse and annoyed. He was ordering the teenager to search the area thoroughly. They were hunting like predators looking for wounded prey. I pressed myself against the cold rock face, eyes wide, staring into the pitch-black night. Fear engulfed me. If they found me here, I was certainly dead. I thought about my family, my old friends, my failed life. I didn't want to die like this, killed in an unknown, desolate forest by a stranger I met online. The footsteps approached my hiding spot, so close that I could hear the teenager's breathing. My heart seemed to stop. I grabbed a sharp-edged stone from the ground, gripping it tightly in my left hand. If he discovered me, I would fight until my last breath. But then the footsteps stopped. A terrifying silence lasted a few seconds. Then the footsteps began to move away. Perhaps the thick darkness had blinded them. Jack called the teenager back. He said something about me not being able to survive the night in the woods with that wound. I lay still and motionless, not daring to breathe deeply even after the footsteps had completely faded. I waited until the night fully enveloped the forest, turning everything into absolute blackness. The coldness of the mountain night began to seep into my skin, combined with the blood loss, making me shiver uncontrollably, but I knew I couldn't afford to die here. I had to live. I had to seek revenge. I had to expose the true face of the man named Jack to the world. I waited for about 2 hours until I was certain they were gone before I dared to crawl out of my hiding place. My body was stiff and aching. I oriented myself based on the faint moonlight filtering through the tree canopy. I remembered the direction we had driven in, and I decided to walk back that way, hoping to find a road or a house. The journey in the dark was an ordeal. Every step was torture. I tripped constantly, thorns tearing at my skin. The wound on my arm ached intensely, swelling up. Thirst began to torment my throat, but the image of Jack's cold gun barrel was the motivation that kept me moving. I walked and walked until my legs were completely exhausted, and then I saw a faint light in the distance. It wasn't starlight, but the yellowish electric light from a house. Hope flared up intensely within me. I gathered my last bit of strength, crawling towards that light. It was a small country house on the edge of the forest. I staggered onto the porch, pounding hard on the wooden door. "Save me, please save me." My voice was hoarse and weak, but loud enough to wake the people inside. The porch light turned on, the sound of the door latch clicking. The door opened, and an elderly woman looked at me with horror. I knew I looked no different from a zombie resurrected from the dead, my clothes torn, covered in mud and blood. "They tried to kill me," I whispered and collapsed onto the cold porch floor. I heard the woman calling her husband, the sound of them calling 911. Everything around me began to blur. I lay there, looking up at the star-filled night sky, feeling safety slowly enveloping me. I had survived. I had escaped the grave Jack had dug for me. The police arrived soon after. The siren ripped through the quiet night. They gave me first aid and loaded me into the ambulance. While lying on the stretcher, I briefly told the officer about Jack, the teenager, and the deadly trap on Craigslist. Later, I learned that Jack's real name was Richard Beasley. I was not the first victim, but I was the only lucky one who survived. Before me, 3 other men had also sought that dream job and never returned. They had been shot and buried right in the forest I had just escaped from. I look at the scar on my arm, a permanent mark reminding me of the thin line between life and death, and of the cruelty that can hide behind sweet invitations on the virtual network. I live to tell this story, to unmask the killer, but a part of my soul seems to still wander somewhere in the dark woods of Noble County, forever haunted by the dry gunshot sound of that afternoon. April in Boston was still chilly. The wind blowing in from the harbor carried the characteristic dampness of the New England region, weaving through the gleaming glass skyscrapers. I stood by the high-floor window of the Westin Copley Place Hotel, looking down at the traffic, which resembled slow-moving ants. This luxury room cost hundreds of dollars a night, a price a girl in my line of work had to grit her teeth and pay for the sake of safety. I always had my own rules when working through Craigslist. Never go to a private residence, never get into a stranger's car, and only meet at high-end hotels with good security and cameras everywhere. The Westin was a perfect choice. The thick carpeted hallways swallowed footsteps, the service staff were polite, and the key card system provided strict control. I thought that here, in this fortress of concrete and glass, nothing bad could ever touch me. That was the most foolish arrogance of my life. Today's client called himself Andy. His email was brief, polite, grammatically correct, and lacked the vulgar or cheap sexually suggestive language often found in the personals section of Craigslist. He agreed to the price without bargaining. He set the meeting for 10 p.m., a late hour but not unusual for this profession. I checked my makeup in the mirror. Heavily lined eyes, red lips, carefully styled blonde hair. I was a beautifully packaged commodity, and I accepted that because the green bills could pay for the mounting bills at home. The clock struck 10 p.m., a knock sounded at the door. It wasn't hurried or rough, 3 rhythmic, measured knocks. I took a deep breath, adjusted my dress, and stepped out to open the door. The man standing before me was completely different from the pot-bellied middle-aged men or the scruffy young guys I usually met. He was tall, about 6'1", slender but with broad shoulders. His blonde hair was neatly short-cut, his face bright and handsome in an academic way. He wore a clean dark jacket and well-pressed dress pants. He looked exactly like one of the elite Harvard or MIT students wandering around this neighborhood, or a young bank employee just getting off work. "Hello, Andy," I smiled, the practiced, professional smile I had performed 1,000 times. "Please come in." He gave a slight nod, didn't smile back, but his eyes didn't look threatening. He stepped into the room. A faint, pleasant scent of men's cologne lingered. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding dry and final. It was the sound of privacy, but just a few seconds later, I realized it was the sound of a trap snapping shut. The moment the door closed, the atmosphere in the room suddenly changed. The politeness, the academic look vanished like fog meeting intense sunlight. He turned around. In his hand was not a wallet, but a cold, black semi-automatic handgun. I froze, the blood in my veins seemed to stop flowing. Every reflex, every coping skill I had, was paralyzed by the dark muzzle pointing straight at my chest. "Quiet," his voice rang out. "Calm down," coldly. There was no tremble of a first-time offender, nor the madness of an addict. His voice was as steady as a doctor delivering a diagnosis. "If you scream, I will shoot." I instinctively raised both hands, backing away until my spine hit the cold wall. I nodded frantically, my throat choked, unable to speak a word. I wanted to tell him to take the money, take everything, but fear had locked my tongue. He motioned for me to lie down on the floor. I obeyed instantly, lying face down on the thick carpet. The smell of dust and cleaning chemicals filled my nostrils. He walked closer, the sound of his leather shoes hitting the floor like a hammer tapping on my eardrum. He knelt down, pressing his weight onto my back. I felt the absolute weight and dominance. He pulled a handful of white plastic zip ties from his pocket, the kind of cable ties usually used to bundle computer wires. He pulled my hands behind my back, tightening the plastic ties around my wrists. The sound of the plastic rubbing against itself was sharp and jarring. He did it skillfully, neatly, and with astonishing precision. Not one wasted movement. "Don't move," he ordered when I let out a soft groan of pain. After tightly securing my hands, he proceeded to tie my feet together. I lay there, completely helpless, like livestock waiting to be slaughtered. Tears began to stream out, hot on my cheeks, soaking into the carpet. 1,000 worst-case scenarios flashed through my mind. He would rape me, he would torture me, he would kill me and hide my body in the bathtub. This was a luxury hotel. No one would hear me scream through these soundproof walls. "Where is your wallet?" he asked, still that chillingly calm tone. In the handbag on the table, I managed to utter the words, my voice trembling and fractured. He stood up. I heard the sound of him rummaging through my belongings, the sound of the zipper on my handbag, the sound of my leather wallet being opened. He took all my cash, about $800. It was the money I had saved up all week, but it wasn't enough. "What's your debit card PIN?" he returned, squatting beside me. The gun muzzle lightly brushed my hair, touching my ice-cold temple. I recited the sequence of numbers for him. I didn't dare to lie. At this moment, money was meaningless. I just wanted to live. I just wanted to see the sunlight tomorrow. He memorized the numbers, then continued to search the room. He took my phone, removed the battery, and tossed it aside. He even took my underwear. I didn't understand why he took it. A trophy, an insult, or simply a sick habit. He returned to me one last time. I shut my eyes tight, waiting for the final shot or a knife slash, but nothing happened. "Don't scream or call anyone until I've been gone for 10 minutes, he said. "If you disobey, I will come back." I heard his footsteps moving towards the door, the sound of the latch opening then closing. He was gone. I lay motionless for about a minute, my heart pounding as if it would break my ribcage. Had he really left, or was he standing in the hallway waiting? I held my breath and listened. There was no sound. The silence of the luxury hotel room now became more terrifying than ever. Survival instinct took over. I started struggling. The plastic ties bit tightly into my wrists, cutting into my skin painfully. Blood began to seep out, but I didn't care. I tried to curl up, using my teeth to bite at the ties on my wrists. This type of plastic was too tough. I rolled over, trying to stand up, but my tied feet made me tumble down. I inched my way towards the bedside table, where the hotel's landline phone was. I used my chin to knock the receiver off, then tried to dial the number with my nose. "Security, I need security." When the security personnel and the police burst into the room, they found me huddled on the floor, my tears smeared, my wrists and ankles bruised from the restraints. I was rescued. I was alive. The following days were a nightmare. I reported every detail I could remember to the police. The handsome face, the blonde hair, the leather shoes, the gun, and especially his chilling calmness. The police collected images from the security cameras. The footage showed him walking through the hotel hallway, relaxed, hands in his pockets, showing no sign of the rush of someone who had just committed an armed robbery. I thought I was lucky to have escaped. I thought he was just a robber in need of money. But 4 days later, the horrifying truth was truly revealed. On the evening news, the anchor reported a murder at the Marriott Copley Place Hotel, just a few streets away from where I was attacked. The victim was Julissa Brisman, a 26-year-old girl also posting on Craigslist. She was also tied with plastic zip ties, but she wasn't as lucky as me. She had resisted, and the perpetrator had shot her 3 times in the chest at close range, ending her life right there on the hotel room floor. When I saw the surveillance footage from the Marriott Copley Place Hotel shown on TV, I screamed hysterically, dropping the glass of water in my hand. It was him. The same figure, the same blonde hair, the same polite clothes. It was the same man who had pointed a gun at my head. He didn't stop after robbing me. He continued to hunt. The police called me. They confirmed the link between the two cases. I realized that I wasn't just the victim of a robbery. I was the only surviving witness of a serial killer in the making. If I had screamed that day, if I had resisted, the person in the body bag today would be me, not Julissa. That thought haunted me, suffocating me every time night fell. A week later, the police arrested him. Philip Markoff, 23 years old, second-year medical student at Boston University School of Medicine. When I saw his student ID photo in the newspaper, I shivered. A brilliant medical student, a bright future ahead, with a beautiful fiancée also studying medicine. He lived a perfectly dual life that no one suspected. During the day, he wore a white coat, learning how to save lives. At night, he went online, hunting for girls like me to satisfy his brutal depravity and greed. He used his knowledge of anatomy to tie us up in the most effective way. He used his intellectual appearance to deceive our vigilance. He considered us experiments, low-life prey whose life and death he could arbitrarily decide. I look at my hands. The scars left by the plastic zip ties are still faint. They will fade over time, but the memory of Philip Markoff's emotionless eyes in the plush Westin hotel room that night will never disappear. I saw the devil, and the scariest thing was not that he had horns or fangs. The scariest thing was that he had the face of an angel, and he walked among us, smiling and greeting like a friendly neighbor. I survived, but a part of my faith in humanity died with the click of that door latch that night. San Diego that night, the cold from the Pacific Ocean seemed to penetrate deep into my bones. Everything began with a simple dream and ended in an eternal nightmare. Garrett, my boyfriend, always dreamed of becoming a music producer. At 18, the world in our eyes was still brightly painted with the rosy colors of infinite possibility. He had talent, he had passion, but he lacked the tools. He needed a MacBook Pro to run professional music software. For a high school graduate like Garrett, the price of $2,000 for a new machine was too much. That's why we screamed with joy when we found that ad on Craigslist. A late-model MacBook Pro, powerful configuration, listed for $600. The seller explained that he urgently needed cash to pay rent, a plausible reason, a bargain too good to pass up. We were too naive to understand that nothing in this world is cheap unless it's a trap. We arranged the meeting for 9 p.m. Garrett drove his silver Honda Accord and I sat in the passenger seat, gripping the envelope containing the $600 cash that Garrett had painstakingly saved. He was thrilled. He talked about the music he would make, about our future. I looked sideways at his face under the yellow streetlights, feeling contagious happiness. The address the seller sent led us to the Paradise Hills area. The name sounded beautiful, but in reality, it was a maze of steep roads and silent houses with closed doors. The deeper we drove in, the sparser the streetlights became. We turned onto a dead-end street, Casey Street. The place was terrifyingly dark and silent. No one was strolling, no sound of traffic, just rows of houses as quiet as tombs. A feeling of unease crept into my stomach, twisting my insides. I turned to Garrett. "This place looks weird," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Garrett reassured me. He said it would be a quick transaction, grab the machine and leave immediately. He turned off the engine but left the headlights on. We sat and waited. A few minutes later, 3 figures emerged from the darkness at the end of the alley. They were 3 young men about our age or slightly older. They wore hooded sweatshirts, their hands shoved deep into their jacket pockets. Their gait exuded stealth and menace. They didn't look like people who needed to sell a computer to pay rent. They looked like hunters. I gripped Garrett's arm tightly. He, too, sensed that something was wrong. He restarted the car, the engine's growl breaking the silence, but he didn't leave. He still wanted that computer. The 3 young men approached the driver's side window. Garrett rolled the window down about a hand's width. "Do you guys have the computer?" Garrett asked. One of them nodded, stepping closer. He mumbled something unclear. Garrett leaned out slightly to hear better. And then everything happened so fast that my brain couldn't process it. The nearest one pulled his hand from his pocket. There was no computer, only a cold, black gun barrel pointed straight at Garrett's face. "Give me all the money," he hissed. The air in the car froze. I stopped breathing. My eyes widened, staring at the gun, that lethal metal object just inches from the temple of the man I loved. Garrett was stunned. The earlier excitement vanished, replaced by sheer terror. "Hurry up," the guy growled, his finger resting on the trigger. Garrett turned to me, his eyes full of remorse and fear. I trembling handed him the envelope of cash. Garrett passed it through the window gap to the robber. "Phones too," he ordered. We handed over both our cell phones. He snatched everything, giving a savage smirk before signaling his two accomplices. The three of them turned and ran toward a car parked out of sight in the darkness at the end of the alley. They jumped into the car and sped away, leaving us sitting alone in the Honda in the middle of the night. Garrett slammed his hand onto the steering wheel. His breath was ragged, his face flushed with anger and humiliation. He had just been robbed right in front of his girlfriend. His long-saved money was gone into the hands of thugs. The ego of an 18-year-old boy was deeply wounded. "This can't be happening," Garrett ground out. Before I could react, Garrett shifted gears and pressed hard on the accelerator. The Honda lunged forward like a wounded animal, speeding in the direction the robber's car had just disappeared. "Garrett, no," I screamed, gripping the door handle tightly. "Don't follow them. The money's gone, just let it go. Please stop." But Garrett didn't hear me, or he heard me but couldn't stop anymore. Adrenaline had taken over his mind. He wanted to reclaim justice. He wanted to get back what was his. Our car streaked through the deserted streets of Paradise Hills. The speedometer climbed to a dangerous number, 40 miles per hour, 60 miles per hour. I saw the bright red taillights of the robber's car ahead. They were trying to lose us. They swerved around sharp corners, running stop signs. Garrett was right on their tail. His driving skills were good, but this wasn't a racetrack, and our opponents were armed. "Garrett, please," I sobbed. "They have a gun, they'll shoot." "I'll get the money back," Garrett said, his eyes glued to the front. "I remember their license plate. I'm going to cut them off." We sped onto the ramp leading to State Route 54 freeway. The sound of the wind outside the window was like the shriek of death. The distance between the two cars narrowed. The robbers realized they couldn't lose Garrett. Their car suddenly swerved, trying to exit through a different ramp but losing momentum. They staggered and slowed down. This was Garrett's chance. He floored the gas pedal, accelerating to cut in front of them, forcing them to the side of the road. It was a brave but reckless action. As the front of our car pulled alongside the rear of theirs, the back window of the robber's car rolled down. Time seemed to stand still in that moment. I saw a dark figure leaning out of the window. I saw metal flash under the freeway lights. "Get down," Garrett screamed. Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. A deafening bang erupted, tearing through the noisy space of the engine and the wind. Unlike a firecracker, it was a million times drier and more cruel. The windshield in front of me cracked into a spider web. I felt a rush of heat graze past. I curled up in my seat, hands covering my head. Our car spun out of control. Garrett was no longer holding the steering wheel. His hands hung loose. The Honda slid forward by inertia, veering off the lane. The world turned upside down. The sound of metal crunching, glass shattering, tires screeching against the pavement was piercing. My body was violently tossed around despite being belted in. My head slammed into the window. Everything went black for a moment. When I opened my eyes, a terrifying silence surrounded me. The car had stopped by the roadside, its front end crumpled and smoking. I choked on the smell of burnt rubber and engine. A sharp pain shot through my head and chest, but I was still conscious. I turned to my side. "Garrett," I called softly. He sat there, his head slumped to his chest, in a position as if sleeping, but no one sleeps like that. I trembling reached out to touch his shoulder. "Garrett, wake up, we had an accident." He didn't reply. I looked down at his chest. Under the faint glow of the streetlights, I saw a dark patch spreading across his white t-shirt. It was blood, a lot of blood. The robber's bullet had passed through the windshield and lodged directly in his chest. A fatal shot. My scream was trapped in my throat. I tried to shake him, tried to cover the wound, but the blood kept pouring out between my fingers, warm and sticky. "Garrett, don't leave me, please," I sobbed, my tears mixing with the blood on my hands. Around us, other cars began to stop. The wail of police and ambulance sirens echoed from afar, getting closer. but to me, all sounds had become meaningless. I sat there in the wreckage of the car, holding the cooling body of the man I loved. Just an hour ago, we were laughing, dreaming of a future filled with music and trips, all for a cheap computer, all for a moment of impulsiveness to seek justice. When the paramedics pulled me out of the car, I struggled, wanting to stay with Garrett. They said he was gone. They said he had died instantly from that gunshot. That night at the police station was torture. I had to recount every detail, every moment, the faces of the 3 robbers, the license plate, and the moment Garrett decided to chase them. The police later arrested them, Rashan, Seendel, and Shackwell, 3 unfamiliar names who stole Garrett's life. They were charged with murder, but what sentence could ever bring Garrett back to me? Many years have passed since that fateful night. I still often wake up at 2 a.m., drenched in sweat, with the dry, sharp sound of the explosion tearing through the silence echoing in my ears. I survived, but Garrett did not. I learned a painful lesson at the highest possible cost. No bargain on Craigslist is worth a life. When facing evil, courage is sometimes foolishness, and letting go is sometimes the only way to survive. Every time I see a MacBook Pro, my heart aches. People see a modern piece of technology. But I see Garrett's smile, I see the dark dead-end street in Paradise Hills, and I see the spreading bloodstain on the white t-shirt of the 18-year-old boy who will forever remain young. May 3, 2013. The California sky was blue, and the golden sunshine characteristic of Orange County stretched across the neatly trimmed lawns. It should have been a cheerful Friday. It was the day of the annual alumni softball game, an event my older sister, Maribel Ramos, never missed. She was a veteran who had served in Iraq, a woman with iron discipline and absolute loyalty to her commitments. She was never late, let alone absent without reason. Yet when the clock struck 6 p.m., Maribel still hadn't shown up. I called her cell phone for the 10th time, still voicemail. The silence on the other end was not merely an absence. It was heavy, dark, and portended a tragedy. A cold feeling ran down my spine, seeping into every cell. I knew with a sister's intuition that something terrible had happened. She hadn't gone out, she hadn't overslept, she had vanished. I drove to her apartment in the city of Orange. The drive felt endless. In my mind, the image of the man she was living with appeared, K.C. Joy. Maribel had found him on Craigslist about a year before. She needed a roommate to share the rent so she could focus on her university studies after being discharged from the military. K.C. Joy, 54, seemed like a safe choice. He was older, quiet, and didn't appear threatening. He was unemployed and spent most of his time at home, but he was outwardly polite. However, recently, Maribel had complained to me that he was becoming strange. He wasn't paying rent. He started showing possessive, unreasonably jealous behavior, even though there was no romantic relationship between them. She had decided to ask him to leave. I parked in front of the apartment complex. Maribel's car was still in its usual spot. If the car was here, she should be inside, or she was taken away without her car. I hurried to the door of apartment 214, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked, no answer. I knocked harder. The door opened. K.C. Joy stood there. He was wearing an old t-shirt, his face sagging with characteristic hooded eyes. He looked at me, his expression completely calm, too calm for someone whose roommate had just gone missing. "Where's Maribel?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "She didn't come home last night," Joy replied, his voice flat, devoid of any anxious emotion. "I thought she went out with a boyfriend or someone." I looked straight into his eyes, trying to find a hint of truth, but those eyes were dark and hollow like 2 black holes. He stood right in the doorway, not intending to invite me in, but I squeezed past him anyway. The living room was as usual, but the air inside was thick and suffocating. I went into Maribel's bedroom. The bed was neatly made. Her wallet, car keys, and even her back pain medication were still on the desk. Maribel never left home without these things. She was a soldier. She always had a plan and was prepared. Leaving her wallet and medication meant she had no intention of leaving. Joy followed me, leaning against the door frame, arms crossed over his chest. At that moment, under the fluorescent light of the hallway, I saw a detail that made the blood in my veins run cold. There were scratches on Joy's arm. They were long, red streaks running along his bicep and forearm. The scratches were very fresh, not yet scabbed over. They looked like fingernail marks from a desperate struggle. "What happened to your arm?" I asked, pointing directly at the wounds. Joy flinched, quickly pulling down his sleeve to cover them. He avoided my gaze. "Oh, I was walking in the park and got scratched by thorns. The bushes were too thick." The lie was so clumsy it was laughable. What park in this concrete city had thorns that could tear someone's skin like that? The image of Maribel struggling, her fingernails digging into her attacker's arm in her final moments, flashed through my mind. I knew he had done something. I couldn't prove it yet, but I knew. I left the apartment immediately and called 911. The police arrived quickly. A veteran going missing along with suspicious circumstances at the scene prompted their immediate involvement. They questioned Joy and searched the apartment, but there was no concrete evidence to arrest him. He remained free. The following days were a prolonged nightmare. My family and I printed thousands of flyers, posting them on utility poles, bus stops, and stores throughout the area. We organized search parties, turning over every bush and every alley. Joy was still there in my sister's apartment. He even gave an interview to the local TV station. I sat in front of the television, gripping the armrest until my knuckles were white, watching his fake composure on the screen. He told the camera that Maribel was his best friend, that he hoped she would return, that he was worried sick. He played the role of a devoted roommate perfectly. But I knew the truth behind that mask. The police informed me that he had sent text messages to Maribel's phone after she disappeared. Messages like, "Where are you? Come home. We need to talk." It was his way of creating an alibi, trying to prove he didn't know she was dead. But he didn't know that the police had located his and Maribel's phones at the same place the night she vanished. Maribel's final 911 call on the night of May 2nd was also revealed. She had called to complain about being threatened by Joy. Her voice in the recording was full of exhaustion and anxiety. She said he was acting weird and she was afraid. That was the last voice of my sister left in this world. The turning point in the case came from a foolish mistake by the killer. Since the police had confiscated Joy's laptop and phone for investigation, he went to a public library to access the internet. He thought the public computer would be safe, that it wouldn't leave personal traces. He was wrong. The police were monitoring him. Detectives called me to the police station on a dreary afternoon. They showed me Joy's search history at the library. The words on the screen made me sick. "Time for a human body to decompose. Satellite map of the Majska Canyon area." He wasn't searching for news about the missing person. He wasn't looking for ways to help. He was checking how much the body he hid had decomposed and whether anyone had found the location yet. He regarded my sister, a flesh and blood human being, a soldier who had served her country, as nothing more than garbage to be disposed of. May 17, 2 weeks after Maribel disappeared. Based on the map data Joy had viewed, the police narrowed the search area to Majska Canyon, a desolate, secluded region deep within the Santa Ana Mountains. I stood waiting at the perimeter of the cordon, my eyes fixed on the busy police cars. The mountain wind blew strongly, carrying the scent of dust and dry grass. I prayed for a miracle, even though my reason knew hope was too fragile. I just wanted to find her, to bring her home. Around 2 p.m., a police officer walked toward me. He took off his hat, his face grave. I understood without him saying a word. They had found her. Maribel's body was crudely buried under a layer of earth, rocks, and dry branches, in a secluded spot that only someone familiar with the terrain or who had thoroughly studied the map could have found. Due to the advanced state of decomposition in the California heat, they couldn't definitively determine the cause of death, but all evidence pointed in one direction. Joy was arrested immediately. The subsequent trial was another period of suffering I had to endure. I had to sit there, looking at the back of the murderer's head, listening to his lawyer argue that Maribel might have died of natural causes or suicide, and that Joy only panicked and hid the body. A blatant lie. Maribel was a warrior, she never gave up, and she certainly didn't die of natural causes right after arguing with him about rent. The scratches on Joy's arm, his online search history, and his sick obsession with Maribel were undeniable evidence. He had loved her in a twisted way, and when she rejected him, when she asked him to leave, he decided that if he couldn't have her, no one could. I stood before the court, reading my victim impact statement. I looked directly into Casey Joy's eyes, for the first time since the day I met him at the apartment door. "You took away our sister, our daughter, our friend," I said, my voice echoing in the silent courtroom. You thought you could erase her from this world and continue living as if nothing happened, but you were wrong. She fought until her last breath, leaving traces on your own body to denounce your crime. Casey Joy was sentenced to life imprisonment for second-degree murder. He never admitted his actions, maintaining that cold, emotionless expression until he was led away. The case closed, but the pain never truly ended. I often drive to the cemetery, sitting by her grave for hours. I tell her about life, about the softball games that still happen, about how justice was served. Craigslist brought Casey Joy into my sister's life. An ad seeking a roommate, a few brief lines of description, and a decision to meet led to this tragic end. We often think danger lurks in dark alleys, but sometimes it is invited right into the living room, sleeps in the next room, and eats at the same table. I survived this tragedy not to forget, but to remember. I carry the memory of Maribel, of her smile, her strength, and her sacrifice. And I carry the expensive lesson written in blood, that kindness and trust can sometimes be a fatal weakness in the face of devils in human disguise. Never be complacent with strangers who enter your life from the virtual world, because you never know what knife they are hiding behind their back, or what they are searching for about decomposition time in the darkness of public libraries.